I lived in that house for 18 years, and there was one rule my mother never had to repeat twice. Don't touch that door.
It was at the end of the upstairs hallway, past the bathroom with the cracked tile, and the linen closet that always smelled like bleach and lavender. A white door with a brass knob. Nothing special to look at. No markings. No warning sign. No explanation. Just a lock. And my mother's voice every time my eyes lingered on it a little too long. Stay away from that room, Ellie. Not please. Not you wouldn't understand. Just a flat, cold sentence that ended the conversation before it began. The strange part wasn't that she kept it locked. The strange part was how she looked whenever I asked why. Not angry. Terrified. When I was 6, I thought maybe there was a monster in there. When I was 9, I thought maybe that's where she hid Christmas presents. When I was 12, I was sure it had to be something worse. Money, a gun, a dead body. Something dramatic enough to explain the way the air changed whenever that door came up. By 16, I stopped asking. Not because I stopped wondering. Because I'd learned there were some questions in our house that cost too much. And my mother had a way of making curiosity feel like betrayal. So I learned to live around the mystery. I learned to brush my teeth in the upstairs bathroom without glancing too long at the end of the hall. Learned to walk past that door in the dark without letting my imagination drag me backward. Learned to pretend it was just another weird family thing, like my mother labeling every box in the basement with dates no one understood, or how she froze any time someone said the name Hannah on TV. We were not a normal mother-daughter pair. People from the outside thought we were quiet, private, maybe a little old-fashioned. But private and haunted can look similar from a distance. My mother, Claire, was the kind of woman who kept her hair neat even when no one was coming over, who folded dish towels into perfect rectangles, who paid every bill early and never let dishes sit in the sink overnight. Control was her religion. Everything in our house had a place. Except me. I don't mean she didn't feed me or clothe me.
She did.
She packed my lunches. She took me to dentist appointments. She sat in folding chairs at school plays and clapped politely. But love for my mother always felt like something she was performing from memory. Like she had once known exactly how to be warm and safe and soft, and then one day forgot. There were moments, though. That's what made it harder. Some nights when I was little, if I had a fever or a nightmare, she'd sit beside me and brush my hair off my forehead with a tenderness so deep it made my chest ache. On those nights, she'd look at me with this expression I didn't understand back then. Like she loved me so much it hurt. Like looking at me was both a gift and a punishment. Then morning would come, and she'd be distant again. Efficient. Measured. Impossible to reach. As a kid, you don't have language for that kind of inconsistency. You just assume you're the reason for it. So, I spent most of my childhood trying to become easier to love. Quieter. Better grades. Fewer questions. Less messy. Less emotional. Less me. And still there was that room. Always there. Always locked. Always pulsing at the edge of my life, like a second heartbeat in the house. The first time I ever got close to opening it, I was 8. It was a Saturday in November, one of those gray afternoons where the whole sky looks like wet newspaper. My mother was outside dragging garbage bins to the curb, and I was supposed to be cleaning my room. Instead, I was kneeling in the hallway with a bent bobby pin, and a level of confidence only a child can have. I'd seen a girl do it on a TV show.
How hard could it be?
I was so focused on the keyhole that I didn't hear my mother come back inside. The scream she let out when she saw me was so sharp, I dropped the pin and hit my elbow against the wall. Ellie. I'd never heard her sound like that before. Not angry.
Panicked.
She crossed the hallway in what felt like one step, grabbed my wrist, and yanked me away from the door so hard my socks slid on the hardwood. It was just a joke, I remember saying immediately, because kids know when something has gone way past normal. Her fingers were clamped around my arm. Her face had gone white. Do not ever do that again. I stared at her. Why? And for 1 second, just one, she looked like she might actually tell me. Her mouth parted. Her eyes filled in a way I'd never seen. Then it was gone. Because I said so. She let go of my arm and walked downstairs. That night, I heard her crying through the wall. Not soft crying. The kind you do when you think no one can hear you. I lay awake under my blanket, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling, and something in me shifted. I didn't understand what was inside that room, but I understood this. Whatever it was, it owned her. And in some quiet, invisible way, it owned me too. By the time I was in high school, my mother and I had become experts at functioning around each other. We could discuss groceries, school forms, the weather, and whether the washing machine was making that noise again. But there were entire continents between us emotionally. I remember once, sophomore year, my best friend Tara came over to work on a history project. We were sitting at the dining room table with index cards spread everywhere when she looked up toward the stairs and said, casually, "What's in a locked room?" I froze. She laughed.
What?
You told me about it. My mother was at the sink rinsing a coffee mug. She stopped moving. Actually stopped. Water still running. Mug in hand. Her shoulders went rigid. I watched her reflection in the dark kitchen window, waiting for her to turn around. She didn't. After a long second, she said, very calmly, "Girls, keep working." Tara looked at me with raised eyebrows, thinking she'd just stumbled into normal family weirdness. She had no idea. After she left, my mother came into my room without knocking. "I don't want you talking about that room with other people." I sat up from my bed. Why not? Because it's private. Everything in this house is private. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't take them back. She looked tired. More than angry. More than anything, she looked old. "There are things," she said slowly, "that are difficult to explain to people who haven't lived them." I remember staring at her then, thinking, try me. But she just nodded once and left. That was the thing about my mother. She always came close to honesty, then chose the lock instead. I left for college at 18 with 2 duffel bags, a half-dead succulent, and a private promise to myself that I would never live in a house with secrets again. I only made it 1 semester. Not because I wasn't smart enough. Because life is expensive, grief is expensive, and my mother got sick. It started with exhaustion she couldn't explain. Then bruises. Then appointments. Then the word leukemia spoken by a doctor in a beige office while I sat beside her trying to understand how a room could suddenly feel too small for oxygen. She didn't cry. My mother never cried in front of people if she could help it. She just folded her hands in her lap and asked practical questions. What are the treatment options? What's the timeline? What do I need to sign? On the drive home, she asked if I was hungry. That was my mother in a sentence. I moved back in 3 weeks later. The house looked exactly the same. The locked door was still there. And now there was something almost cruel about it. As if death itself had moved into the house and taken up residence behind it. Her illness changed things, but not in the ways movies prepare you for. We didn't suddenly become best friends who stayed up late telling each other our deepest truths. There were no dramatic bedside confessions. Mostly there were pill organizers, insurance paperwork, grocery lists, and me learning how to keep track of white blood cell counts while pretending I wasn't terrified. But in the spaces between all that ordinary survival, there were moments. One afternoon, 6 months into treatment, I found her standing in the upstairs hallway staring at the locked door. She didn't hear me come up behind her. Her hand was pressed flat against the wood, not trying to open it, just touching it. Like a person touching a gravestone. "Mom," she flinched and dropped her hand. For a second, she looked embarrassed. Then, almost angry at being caught vulnerable. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Nothing. You were standing there for like 5 minutes. It's my house." I almost laughed, but there was something in her face that stopped me. "Was it someone's room?" I asked quietly. Her eyes snapped to mine. I saw it then. The fear, the guilt, the exhaustion of carrying one truth for too long. She looked down at the floor and said, "Some doors stay closed for a reason." Then she walked away. That sentence would replay in my head so many times after she died. It stopped sounding like a warning and started sounding like a confession. She passed in early March. Cold rain, wet cemetery grass. A pastor who pronounced our last name wrong. I stood beside her casket in a black dress that suddenly felt too thin for the weather and listened to people describe my mother as strong, organized, private, devoted. All true, none complete. At the funeral home, women from church brought casseroles and squeezed my hand like they could press comfort into me through skin. A few people told me, "She loved you very much." And the worst part was, I believed them. That was what made everything harder. It would have been easier if she'd been cruel all the way through. Easier if I could sort her neatly into villain or victim. But my mother had loved me. I think she'd just loved me from inside a cage. And now she was gone before I could understand who built it. After the funeral, the house became unbearably loud in all the wrong ways. The refrigerator hum, the settling pipes, the clock in the hallway, my own footsteps. Grief does something strange to familiar spaces. It makes every object feel like evidence. Her reading glasses still on the side table, a grocery list in her handwriting, a cardigan hanging on the back of a chair. The whole house felt paused, except the door upstairs. That didn't feel paused. That felt awake. I tried to ignore it for 4 days. I told myself I had bigger things to deal with: bank paperwork, death certificates, sorting medications, calling utility companies. But grief is a liar if you think logistics can outrun obsession. Every time I climbed the stairs, my eyes went to the end of the hallway. Every time I passed it, I felt this pressure in my chest. By the 5th night, I couldn't sleep. Rain tapped the windows. The heater clicked on and off. The house had that 2 a.m. feeling where every memory gets louder. I went downstairs barefoot to make tea and found myself standing in my mother's room instead. I hadn't really gone through her things yet. Not properly. I just stood there for a minute, looking at the bed she'd died in. The indentation in the mattress was gone, but I could still feel the shape of her absence. Her dresser drawers were mostly organized because of course they were. Socks rolled, receipts bundled, jewelry in little velvet boxes. And in the back of the top drawer, under a stack of neatly folded slips and old greeting cards, I found a small tin sewing kit. Inside it was a single brass key. Not labeled, not hidden well enough. Just waiting. My whole body went cold. I remember actually sitting down on the edge of her bed because my knees felt unreliable. The key was heavier than I expected, warm from my palm after a few seconds. I didn't need to test it to know. I knew. I think part of me had always known that if the truth ever came, it would come quietly, not with thunder, not with a dramatic letter on top of a pile, just a key in a sewing tin, like she had wanted me to find it, or had wanted to stop herself from throwing it away. I don't know how long I sat there before I finally stood up. The hallway upstairs looked different in the dark. Longer, older, the kind of hallway where childhood fears still live in the corners. I stopped in front of the door and stared at the lock. My hand was shaking so badly, I had to steady it against the frame. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. For one stupid second, I had this irrational thought that maybe if I opened it, I would somehow still hear my mother's voice telling me no. But the house stayed silent. So I slid the key in. It fit. Of course it fit. The lock clicked with a sound so small it should not have been able to split my life in half. I turned the knob and opened the door. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Dust, yes. But underneath that, something faint and sweet. Old powder. Fabric softener. The ghost of a child's shampoo. Air that had been shut away for years. The room was dark except for a thin stripe of moonlight cutting across the carpet from a crack in the curtains. I reached for the wall and found the light switch. When the lamp beside the bed flickered on, I actually stepped backward. Because it wasn't a storage room. It wasn't junk. It wasn't boxes. It was a little girl's bedroom. Frozen. Perfectly, horrifyingly preserved. A twin bed with a pale yellow quilt. Stuffed animals lined up against the pillows. A white bookshelf filled with children's books. Tiny ballet slippers hanging from a bedpost. A dollhouse in the corner. A framed watercolor painting of a bluebird over the dresser. Nothing in that room looked abandoned. It looked paused. Like someone had said, "We'll be back in an hour," and never came home. I don't know how long I stood there. The air felt wrong in my lungs. My eyes moved slowly, trying to make sense of the details. A pink hairbrush on the vanity. Crayons in a ceramic cup. A snow globe. a tiny cardigan draped over a chair, and on the wall above the bed, in white wooden letters, Emma. I whispered it out loud before I could stop myself.
Emma.
The sound of another little girl's name in my mother's house made my stomach turn. I crossed the room like I was underwater. There were framed photographs on the dresser. A little blonde girl with missing front teeth, laughing in a sprinkler. The same girl in a pumpkin costume. The same girl holding a birthday cake with a crooked number 6 candle. And in every single photo, my mother was there too. Younger.
Softer.
Smiling in a way I had almost never seen. My fingers went numb around the frame. Because the little girl in the pictures looked like me. Not just vaguely. Not kids all kind of look alike. She looked like me in the way family photographs sometimes feel like time travel.
Same eyes. Same chin.
Same slight tilt to the smile. I set the frame down too fast and nearly dropped it. No, I whispered. The room suddenly felt smaller. I turned in a circle, trying to anchor myself in something logical. Maybe a cousin. Maybe a niece. Maybe someone my mother had cared for. But then why the secrecy? Why the lock? Why the way she had looked every time I asked? I opened the top dresser drawer. Little socks. Hair ribbons. A child's church program with Emma Grace Whitmore written in pencil on the back. Whitmore. My last name. I stopped breathing for a second. My hands moved on instinct after that, not thought. I opened drawers. Closets. Boxes under the bed. The closet still held tiny dresses on padded hangers. A winter coat. Rain boots. A Halloween witch hat. A backpack with one broken zipper. Inside the backpack was a folder. Inside the folder were school papers with a looping child handwriting. My name is Emma. I am 6 years old. My favorite color is yellow. My mommy makes the best pancakes. I sat down hard on the floor. My mother had another daughter. That was the first thing my brain could hold. Not the only truth. Not the final truth. Just the first. And somehow, that alone already felt like betrayal big enough to drown in. I don't know how long I cried. Not dramatic movie crying. Just ugly, shocked, involuntary tears from a body trying to process too much too fast. Because what does it do to a person to realize she spent her entire childhood in a house built around someone else's absence? What does it mean when your mother loved another version of motherhood enough to preserve it like a museum, but never told you it existed? I should have stopped there. I should have walked out, slept, called someone, returned to it in daylight like a sane person. Instead, I kept looking. Because, deep down, I knew this wasn't the whole truth. It couldn't be. Not with my mother. There was always another lock behind the first one. On the bookshelf, behind a row of old Berenstain Bears books, I found a cream-colored keepsake box with a satin ribbon around it. Inside were hospital bracelets. One tiny, one adult. Both dated the same day. April 14th. 22 years ago. My birthday. I stared at the plastic band in my hand until the numbers blurred. The baby bracelet read, Baby Girl Whitmore, no first name. The adult bracelet read, Claire Whitmore. My mother. My skin prickled. I reached deeper into the box. There were folded discharge papers. A neonatal photo strip. A lock of pale hair tied with yellow ribbon. And beneath all of it, a sealed envelope. My name was written on the front. Not Ellie. Elizabeth. In my mother's handwriting. I just sat there staring at it. Because my mother only ever called me Elizabeth when something serious had happened. And because part of me suddenly knew this was the line between confusion and truth. I opened it carefully, trying not to tear the paper. Inside was a letter. The pages shook in my hands as I unfolded them. Elizabeth, if you are reading this, then I have failed twice. Once when I chose silence, and again because I am no longer here to explain it to your face. I had to stop there. My chest physically hurt. I kept reading. You deserve the truth, even if you hate me for it. Especially then. Your name was not always Elizabeth. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the bed so hard my knuckles burned. When you were born, I named you Emma Grace. You were my second daughter. Not my first. I actually made a sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. My eyes raced down the page. Your sister, Emily, died 3 years before you were born. She was 6 years old. She drowned in Miller's Pond on a Sunday afternoon while I was inside the house on the phone. I was supposed to be watching her. I was supposed to hear the back door open. I was supposed to be her mother. I pressed a hand over my mouth. Emily, not Emma, not the name on the wall. I forced myself to continue. After she died, I stopped being a person for a very long time. When I became pregnant with you, everyone said it was a blessing, a second chance, a reason to keep living. They said God had sent me another little girl because heaven knew I needed one. I let people say those things because I was too weak to stop them. And then you were born and you looked so much like her that I thought I was losing my mind. I looked around the room. The photos. The preserved clothes. The name on the wall. My pulse was pounding now. I named you Emma because I could not bear to hear Emily's name in the house again. It felt like a knife. But after 6 months, I realized I had done something unforgivable. I was not loving you as yourself. I was loving you through grief, through memory, through comparison. I was turning your face into a punishment for both of us.
Tears blurred the ink.
So, I changed your name. Legally. Quietly. I packed up your first nursery, and I locked it away. I told myself I was protecting you. I told myself if I buried that room, I could bury the version of motherhood that had broken me. I stared at the wall letters again.
Emma.
Not another child.
Me.
My first room. My first name. My first life. I kept reading, barely breathing. But grief does not stay buried because a door is locked. It leaks. Into your voice. Into your childhood. Into every moment I flinched when you laughed like her, stood like her, tilted your head like her. You were never a replacement. You were never less loved. But I know I made you feel both invisible and watched at the same time. I know I made our home into a graveyard and asked you to grow up in it. I had to stop again, because I couldn't see. My tears were falling onto the page. My whole life, I had felt like I was standing in the shadow of something unnamed. And I had been right. I just never imagined the shadow was me. The letter continued for 3 more pages. My mother described postpartum depression no one in our town had named back then. She described panic attacks in grocery store parking lots. The way she'd wake from dreams convinced she'd heard a little girl calling from the backyard. She wrote about changing my name from Emma to Elizabeth when I was 7 months old. About boxing up the nursery. About trying to start over and failing in invisible ways no one but me had to live with. Then, near the end, one paragraph stopped me cold. There is one more truth you deserve, and I could never say it out loud. Emily did not leave the back door open by herself that day. My eyes locked on the sentence. I read it again. And again. My heart began to pound so hard it made me nauseous. Your grandmother knew. I turned the page with shaking hands. My mother, June, was babysitting that afternoon. I was in town buying groceries. She stepped outside to smoke while Emily was playing in the yard. She left the gate unlatched. When Emily wandered toward the pond, no one noticed until it was too late. I went completely still. My grandmother, my mother's mother, the woman who sent me birthday cards every year from Florida with $10 bills and signatures that always felt oddly formal. The woman my mother spoke to only on holidays. The woman who had not come to the funeral. My mother begged me not to tell anyone. She said people would blame her. She said it would destroy our family. And I was too shattered to fight. So I let everyone believe it was my fault. In time, I believed it too. I stared at those words until my vision swam. My mother had spent 25 years carrying blame that wasn't entirely hers. And then she had poured that blame into walls, routines, silence, and me. There was one last folded page tucked behind the letter. A note. Shorter.
Sloppier.
Written later. There is a box in the attic labeled Christmas lights. It is not Christmas lights. I laughed out loud at that. A broken, disbelieving, almost hysterical laugh. Because of course my mother would hide the final truth in a fake Christmas box. I don't remember getting up. I only remember climbing the attic ladder too fast and nearly slipping. The attic was unfinished, hot even in March, full of insulation, old furniture, and cardboard boxes with my mother's careful handwriting. Taxes, 2009. Winter coats, camping gear, Christmas lights. I dragged it toward me and opened it. Inside were cassette tapes, a camcorder, a stack of legal papers, and one spiral notebook. The notebook was my mother's journal. I sat cross-legged on the attic floor and opened to the first page that had anything written. April 18th. I held the baby today and called her Emily by accident. I locked myself in the bathroom afterward and bit my hand so hard I bruised it. I don't know how to be a mother without becoming a cemetery. I had to close the notebook for a minute after that, because there is no clean way to receive someone else's pain once they're gone. You can't ask follow-up questions. You can't interrupt and say, "Why didn't you tell me?" You can't tell them they were wrong or forgive them in real time. You just sit there holding the evidence of a person's private ruin. I went through the legal papers next. Most were exactly what the letter had implied: name change documents, my original birth certificate, court filings, a pediatrician note recommending environmental changes after my mother's documented postpartum mental health decline. Then I found something else. A notarized statement signed by June Harper, my grandmother, dated 19 years ago. My hands went cold before I even started reading. It was a written confession. Not to the police.
Not to the town.
To my mother. A private admission. She wrote that she had gone outside that afternoon while Emily was playing with sidewalk chalk. She wrote that she had only been gone a minute. She wrote that when she came back, the gate was open and Emily was gone. She wrote, "I know you blame yourself because it is easier than blaming me." And then, somehow, she still had the nerve to write, "Some truths only make suffering larger." I just sat there in the attic, staring at those words, and something in me hardened. Not because I suddenly hated my grandmother, because I finally understood the architecture of my mother's silence. It had not started with the locked room. It had started with a family that preferred grief over accountability. A family where women swallowed catastrophe and called it survival. And somehow, even dead, they were still trying to hand that inheritance to me.
No, not me.
Not anymore. I spent the rest of the night in pieces. Reading.
Crying. Sorting.
Rereading. At some point the sky outside the attic vent shifted from black to dark blue. Birds started up in the trees. Morning came whether my life had changed or not. By sunrise, I knew two things for sure. 1. My mother had loved me. 2. She had let her grief shape me, without my consent. Both were true, and both hurt. Around 10 that morning, I called the only person in my family who had ever felt remotely safe. My mother's younger sister, Aunt Valerie. We weren't close. More like holiday clothes. She lived 2 towns over, sold real estate, wore expensive boots, and always smelled like vanilla and peppermint. But she had a warmth my mother didn't. And when she answered the phone and heard my voice, she said immediately, "What happened?" I didn't even realize I was crying until she said it. She came over within an hour. I met her at the door still wearing the same sweatshirt I'd slept in. My eyes burned. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. She took one look at me and said, "Oh, honey." Then she hugged me, and I let her. I don't know why that matters, except that after growing up with a mother who held herself together like a sealed jar, being held by someone without explanation felt almost unbearable. I brought her upstairs. I showed her the room. She stopped dead in the doorway and covered her mouth. "Oh, Claire," she whispered. Not shocked that it existed. Shocked, maybe, that it was still exactly the same. "You knew?" I asked. She turned to me slowly. Her face had gone pale. "I knew there used to be a room," she said carefully. "I didn't know she kept it like this." I handed her the letter. She read it sitting on the edge of the tiny bed, while I stood by the window with my arms folded so tightly across my chest they hurt. When she finished, she wiped at her eyes and looked up at me. "She should have told you." I laughed once. Short and ugly.
Yeah.
Valerie looked down at the pages again. "Your mother," she exhaled. "Your mother was never the same after Emily. Did you know about the name change?" A pause. "Yes." The word hit me harder than I expected. I looked away. "I was young," she said quickly. And your mother made me swear I'd never tell. She said she was trying to save both of you. That's what everyone says when they're hiding something. Valerie flinched. I immediately hated myself a little, but not enough to take it back. She nodded once. Fair. Silence stretched between us. Then I asked the question that had been burning through me since the attic. Did you know about Grandma? Valerie's expression changed instantly. Not confusion. Recognition. And that told me everything before she even spoke. Yes, she said quietly. I felt the room drop out beneath me. You knew. Not right away. Claire told me years later. And you all just lived with that? Valerie's eyes filled. You think I didn't want to drag that truth into daylight? You think I didn't scream at your grandmother? I did. More than once. But your mother wouldn't let me tell anyone.
Why?
Because blame had become her home. That sentence made me go still. Valerie stood and crossed the room slowly. Listen to me, Ellie. Her voice softened. Your mother loved you more than anything, but she was sick long before the cancer. She was carrying grief, guilt, rage, and trauma in a town, and a generation that taught women to call all of that strength. I stared at the floor. She didn't lock this room because she didn't love you, Valerie said. I looked up. She locked it because she couldn't survive what it represented. I swallowed hard. And what did it represent? Valerie looked around the room. The life she lost. Then she looked at me. And the life she was afraid she'd ruined too. I wish I could say that understanding her changed everything instantly. It didn't. Pain rarely leaves just because it's finally explained. I still felt lied to. Still felt robbed. Still felt like I had spent 22 years being raised inside a wound no one would name. But understanding did something quieter. It gave shape to what had always felt like random damage. And shape, weirdly, is easier to survive than fog. Valerie helped me go through the room that afternoon. Not to erase it.
Just to understand it.
We found more photographs. Birthday cards. A lock of hair from Emily's first haircut. A church bulletin from her funeral. And then, in the bottom drawer of the vanity, under a stack of coloring books, I found one more envelope. This one wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Mom. My grandmother's handwriting. Unopened. I looked at Valerie. She looked back at me, with the same wary dread I was feeling. Do you want me to? She asked. I shook my head.
No.
My voice surprised me by sounding steady. I do. The letter inside was dated only 6 months earlier. My grandmother had written to my mother after hearing about the cancer. The first half was exactly what I expected. Religious cliches, old lady politeness, the emotional equivalent of arranging flowers on a sinkhole. Then, near the end, there was one paragraph that made my blood run hot. I know you have never forgiven me, and perhaps I do not deserve it. But I also know you never told Elizabeth the full truth. Maybe part of you knew that if she understood who left that gate open, she would look at me the way you have all these years. And I could not bear that. I lowered the page slowly. There it was. Not remorse. Self-protection. Even now. Even at the edge of death and old age and everything else. I looked at Valerie. She wrote this 6 months ago. Valerie nodded grimly. She was always more afraid of being seen clearly than of causing harm. That line landed in me like a nail, because suddenly so much of my family made sense. The carefulness, the silences, the obsession with appearances, the way women in our bloodline turned pain into furniture and expected everyone else to live around it. I folded the letter back up, very neatly. Then I said, I'm going to call her. Valerie blinked. Today? Yes. You don't have to do anything right now. I know. But I also knew this. If I didn't speak while the truth was hot in my body, I might spend the next 10 years inheriting my mother's habit of waiting too long. So I called. My grandmother answered on the 4th ring. Hello. Her voice was thinner than I remembered. Older. Still irritatingly composed. It's Elizabeth. A pause. Then, cautiously. Oh. Hello, sweetheart. Sweetheart. The audacity nearly made me laugh. I found the room. Silence. Not confusion. Silence. Then, very softly, I see. I stood in the kitchen gripping the counter so hard my fingers hurt. Valerie sat at the table nearby, not listening exactly, but staying close enough in case I shattered. You let her carry that, I said. Another pause. I know.
No.
I don't think you do. I could hear her breathing on the line.
She let me, she said at last.
I closed my eyes. There it was again. That family disease. Passive grammar for active harm. She was your daughter, I said. She was drowning too, and you let her sink under something that was also yours. My grandmother didn't answer. So I kept going, because 22 years of silence had finally found a throat. You know what's insane? I said, voice shaking now. My whole life, I thought my mother was just cold. I thought maybe there was something wrong with me. I thought maybe I was hard to love. And all this time, I was living in the fallout of a secret you were too selfish to own. She inhaled sharply. Elizabeth.
No.
My voice cracked. No, you don't get to soothe this. You don't get to call me sweetheart and tell me life is complicated. You left a gate open. A child died. Your daughter carried it until it poisoned everything. And I grew up inside that poison. I was crying now, so hard my words kept catching. On the other end, she was quiet for so long I thought maybe she'd hung up. Then she said, barely audible, I am sorry. And maybe she meant it. Maybe she had meant it for years. Maybe she had lived with her own private hell all this time. But some apologies arrive after the damage has already built a house. And I was too tired to live in it another day. I believe you, I said. That seemed to surprise her. Then I added, but I'm still done. And I hung up. I stood there shaking for a full minute after the call ended. Not triumphant. Not healed. Just emptied. Valerie came over and wrapped her arms around me from the side. And for the first time in my life, I let myself cry like a child. Not quietly. Not politely. The kind of crying my mother had always hidden. The kind that says, this happened. This hurt. And I am not carrying it alone anymore. The next few weeks were strange. Grief and paperwork. Boxes and memories. Sorting what to keep and what to let go. But something had shifted. The house no longer felt like it was watching me. It felt like it was finally telling the truth. I spent hours in the locked room after that. Not every day. Not all at once. Just in pieces. Sometimes I'd sit on the little bed and read my mother's journals. Sometimes I'd go through old photo albums and study the face of the sister I never knew. Sometimes I'd just stand there and let myself feel angry for no reason I could explain in one sentence. Because grief, I was learning, isn't one clean emotion. It's love with splinters. One afternoon, I found a cassette tape labeled in my mother's handwriting. For Elizabeth, if I'm gone before I'm brave enough. I stared at it for a long time before I could bring myself to play it. I had to buy an old cassette player from a thrift store in town because apparently my emotional breakdown had a retro soundtrack. When I finally pressed play, there was static. Then my mother's voice. You don't realize how much a dead person still lives in your nervous system until you hear them again unexpectedly. I had to sit down on the floor. Her voice was softer on tape. More tired. Less guarded. Elizabeth, she said. Then gave a small, shaky laugh. Or maybe Emma, if I'm being honest, in a way I should have been years ago. I cover my mouth. I don't know if you'll ever hear this. I don't know if I'll ever let you. But if you do, it means I ran out of time before I ran out of fear. I was already crying. I have spent most of your life trying not to break you with what broke me. And I think, in doing that, I broke us anyway. I pressed a fist to my chest because it hurt. I need you to know something very clearly, she said. You were never born to replace anyone. Not Emily. Not the version of me that died with her. You were your own person from the beginning, and I am sorry it took me so long to see you without grief standing in the doorway. I closed my eyes. Her voice cracked then just slightly. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. And I know that may be hard to believe if love for me often felt like distance. But some people love badly because no one taught them what to do with pain except hide it. I was sobbing openly by then. Not because it fixed anything. Because it was the closest thing to emotional honesty I had ever received from her. The tape continued. She talked about my first steps, my obsession with blueberry yogurt at age 4, the way I used to hum when I colored, the time I told my second-grade teacher that my mom's lasagna looked depressed. And through all of it, I heard something I had been starving for my entire life. Not perfection, not redemption, recognition. She had seen me. Even through all the fog, she had seen me. At the very end of the tape, her voice went very quiet. "If you open that room," she said, "open the curtains too." There was a long pause. Then, "Please don't let this family make a mausoleum out of you too." The tape clicked off. I sat there on the bedroom floor for a long time afterward, listening to the silence she'd left behind. Then I stood up, walked to the window, and opened the curtains. Sunlight flooded the room so suddenly it almost looked violent. Dust rose in the air like shaken glitter. The yellow quilt brightened. The dollhouse caught light. The little wooden letters on the wall stopped looking like a shrine and started looking like a child's room again. Not haunted, just loved.
And lost.
And maybe that was sadder. But it was also cleaner.
Truer.
I didn't decide everything in one grand healing montage after that. Real life is less cinematic. Some days I wanted to burn every letter and never think about any of it again. Some days I wanted to crawl inside the room and live there until I understood every version of myself my mother had tried to hide. Mostly, I just took the next honest step. I sold the house in late summer. Not because I hated it, because I didn't want my adult life to begin in a hallway that had taught me fear. Before the closing date, I packed what mattered. The journals.
The tape.
A few photographs. Emily's bluebird painting. My baby bracelet. One stuffed rabbit from the bed. And from the closet in the locked room, I took the small yellow cardigan that had belonged to me before I was Elizabeth. Not because I needed to wear it, because I needed proof that the first version of me had existed, that she had been real, that she deserved to be remembered without being buried. On the last day in the house, I walked through every room alone.
Kitchen.
Living room. My old bedroom. Bathroom.
Hallway.
When I got to the locked room, my room, really, I stood in the doorway and let myself look at it one final time. It no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a truth. Complicated. Painful, tender, human, like my mother. I touched the doorframe and thought about all the years I'd spent believing love had to be quiet to be real, hidden to be safe, controlled to be sincere. But the truth was, secrecy had never protected us. It had only preserved our wounds. So before I left, I did one small thing that would have horrified the version of my mother who lived by locks and labels and fear. I took the brass key. And I left the door open.
Wide.
The realtor probably thought nothing of it later. Just another old bedroom in an old house. But to me, it felt like a sentence ending. Or maybe a beginning. I moved into a small apartment 2 towns away, with terrible parking and windows that rattled when trucks went by. I bought a plant I'm still somehow keeping alive. I started therapy. Real therapy, not family silence in a cardigan. And slowly, very slowly, I began learning the difference between memory and identity. One is what happened to you. The other is what you're allowed to become after. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about my mother standing in that hallway with her hand against the door. How lonely she must have been. How ashamed. How desperate to keep love and grief from destroying each other. I wish she had been brave sooner. I wish she had told me while she was still alive. Well, I could have asked her what Emily's laugh sounded like, or whether she ever almost changed her mind about the name, or if she knew how often I stood outside that room as a child feeling like I was being kept from my own life. I wish a lot of things. But adulthood, I'm learning, is partly the grief of accepting that closure rarely arrives in the shape you want it. Sometimes it arrives as a key in a sewing tin. Sometimes as a room full of dust and ghosts. Sometimes as a tape recorder crackling with the voice of someone who loved you badly, but truly. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it arrives as the moment you decide the secret ends with you. I used to think the locked room was the thing haunting my childhood. I was wrong. It wasn't a room. It was the silence around it. And once I finally opened the door, I understood something my mother never got the chance to learn. What is hidden doesn't disappear. It waits. It seeps. It shapes the children growing up beside it, unless someone is willing to drag it into the light and call it by its real name. So that's what I did. I opened the room. I read the letters. I listened to the dead. I buried what was never mine to carry. And I kept the parts of the truth that felt like love. The rest I left behind. My mother spent my entire childhood trying to keep one bedroom closed. But in the end, opening it was the first honest thing our family had done in 22 years. And for the first time in my life, I walked away from that house knowing exactly who I was.